The town where the lamps never went out. One, the road that didn't lead where you planned. You noticed the day ending quietly, without any clear moment of change. The light beyond the windshield had softened sometime along the way. The sky no longer held onto its earlier color, settling instead into a calm blue-gray evening that felt unhurried. The road stretched forward in a familiar line, smooth and predictable, the kind you had driven often enough to stop thinking about where it led. That was why you almost missed the sign. It stood slightly apart from the road, unlit, wooden, its lettering faded by years of weather. The name was short and plain, not inviting, not warning, just the name of a place that did not seem concerned with being found. You passed it. A few seconds later, a subtle feeling followed. Not regret, not curiosity, but something quieter, as if you had just driven past a thought that had not finished forming. Your hands felt lighter on the steering wheel. The sense of urgency you hadn't noticed carrying began to loosen. You were no longer thinking about arrival times or distance. The road ahead stopped asking anything of you. You pulled over. The engine continued its low, steady hum, but the decision already felt complete, even though you couldn't remember deciding. You turned the car around and headed back toward the sign. The turnoff appeared closer than expected. The main road narrowed, then gave way to a quieter stretch of pavement, then gravel. The sound beneath the tires changed, not louder, just more present. It felt grounding, as if the road itself wanted to be noticed. The landscape shifted with it. Trees stood nearer now, not pressing in, simply existing alongside the road. The air carried a hint of moisture, not rain, but the cool dampness that settles in as the ground releases the warmth of the day. You drove slowly, not because you needed to, but because there was no longer a reason not to. Your headlights revealed small details as they came. A fence, leaning with age, a stone at the edge of the road, the quiet curve of the path ahead. Nothing demanded attention. Nothing needed interpretation. You realized you were no longer trying to understand where you were going. It was enough that you were moving. After some time, minutes, perhaps more, a soft light appeared ahead. Not bright, not centered, just a few scattered points, glowing gently in the distance, as if someone had turned them on without any plan beyond necessity. They did not call to you. They simply existed, and in that moment, you understood that you had not turned back because you were lost. You turned back because you were ready to slow down. Two, the first sight of the town. The lights grew clearer as you approached, though the road remained quiet. They were not arranged the way lights usually are. No straight lines, no obvious center, just warm points of glow, spaced unevenly, as if each one had been placed where it felt necessary, rather than where it looked best. As you drew closer, the shape of the town began to form around them. Low buildings emerged first, their outlines softened by the evening air. Roof lines sloped gently, avoiding sharp angles. Windows reflected the lamplight back toward the street, doubling its warmth. Nothing here tried to stand out. Nothing competed for attention. You slowed further without meaning to. The road narrowed again, guiding you between the first houses. There were no signs telling you to stop, no barriers, just a natural easing of movement, like the town itself was setting the pace. You noticed how quiet it was, not silent. There were sounds, a distant door closing, footsteps somewhere you couldn't see, the faint clink of something metal being set down. But none of it carried urgency. Each sound appeared, existed briefly, and then faded without echo. The lamps themselves were different too. They didn't glare. Their light fell softly, touching the ground in wide circles that overlapped just enough to leave no true darkness between them. The color was warm, closer to amber than yellow, steady and calm. You passed a small square where a few benches stood empty. The stone beneath them looked darkened by earlier moisture, reflecting the light back upward in muted tones. A tree grew at one edge of the square, its leaves barely moving, as if the air had decided to rest. There were people, but they moved differently than you were used to. A couple walked side by side, unhurried, speaking quietly. Someone stood in a doorway, not waiting for anything in particular, just present. A shop window remained lit, its interior calm, as if closing time were a flexible idea here. No one checked a watch. No one hurried past. It struck you then that the town was not preparing for night. It was already comfortable inside it. You found a place to stop near the edge of the square. When you turned off the engine, the quiet settled in immediately, not pressing, not awkward. Simply there. You stayed seated for a moment longer than necessary. The warmth from the drive lingered. The light from the lamps reached the windshield and rested there. Nothing suggested you needed to move quickly or decide anything at all. For the first time that evening, the thought appeared clearly and without tension. You could stay here for a while, and the town, in its steady glow, seemed perfectly fine with that. 3. Stopping where nothing asked you to hurry. You stepped out of the car and felt the air settle around you. It was cooler than inside, but not cold. The kind of temperature that doesn't demand adjustment, only awareness. The ground beneath your feet was solid, uneven in a way that felt intentional, as if the street had grown naturally rather than been designed. You closed the door gently. The sound didn't echo. It didn't draw attention. It simply ended, leaving the quiet intact. The square felt larger now that you were standing in it. Not wide, not grand, just open enough to breathe. The lamps cast their circles of light across the stone, and where those circles met, the glow deepened instead of brightening. No harsh edges, no glare. You noticed a small detail then. The lamps did not flicker. They weren't new, and they weren't decorative, yet their light held steady, as if it had no reason to doubt itself. That steadiness did something subtle to your body. Your shoulders lowered slightly, your jaw loosened. A door opened somewhere nearby, not abruptly, slowly, person stepped out, paused, and looked up at the sky for a moment, as if checking in with the evening rather than the time. Then they walked on, unhurried, their footsteps quiet and even. No one glanced at you with curiosity. No one seemed surprised that you were there. It felt as though arrivals were expected, not scheduled, but accepted. You turned slowly, taking in the edges of the square. A narrow street led off to the left, its lamps spaced farther apart, inviting without insisting. Another path curved gently past a row of houses, their windows glowing softly from within. There were no signs pointing you anywhere, and somehow that felt like permission. You stood there longer than you usually would, long enough to notice how the town did not shift around you. It didn't react. It didn't speed up or slow down. It simply continued being itself. The quiet wasn't empty. It was full of small, settled things, a faint scent of wood smoke, the lingering warmth of stone that had held the day's heat, the distant sound of water moving somewhere beyond the buildings. You realized then that nothing here was asking you to decide anything immediately. You didn't need to choose a direction. You didn't need to explain your presence. You didn't even need to stay standing. The town offered time the way some places offer shelter, without ceremony, without expectation. You took a slow breath, and for the first time that day, you felt no pull to move on right away. Four, the first place that let you rest. You chose a door without much thought. It stood slightly back from the street, framed by warm wood darkened with age. A single lamp hung beside it, casting a steady pool of light over the handle and the step below. The window beside the door glowed softly, its curtains drawn just enough to suggest warmth inside. You knocked once, not loudly, just enough. The door opened almost immediately, as if someone had been expecting the sound. A woman stood there, calm and unhurried, her expression neutral in the kindest way. She did not ask who you were or where you had come from. "You can come in," she said, stepping aside. Inside, the air was warm and settled, not perfumed, not heavy, simply comfortable. The floor beneath your shoes was wood, smooth and quietly solid. A small table stood near the entrance with a bowl for keys, a folded cloth, and nothing more than what was needed. She took your coat and hung it without ceremony. "You can leave your bag there," she added, nodding toward a bench along the wall. You did. The simple act of setting it down felt heavier than it should have, not because it was heavy, but because you hadn't realized how long you'd been carrying it. A kettle rested on a low stove in the next room. It did not whistle. It did not rush. It simply warmed, releasing a soft breath of steam that moved lazily through the air. "Tea?" she asked. You nodded. She poured the water slowly, as if there were no other way to do it. The cup she placed in your hands was warm, thicker than usual, holding its heat patiently. The scent was mild and grounding, something herbal that did not demand attention. The room revealed itself quietly. A table near the window, 2 chairs, a shelf with books that looked handled, not displayed, a lamp with a shade that softened the light rather than directing it. Nothing here was meant to impress. Everything was meant to last. You sat. The chair supported you immediately, without adjustment. Your back relaxed before you noticed it happening. The warmth of the tea spread through your hands and into your shoulders. Outside, the lamps continued their steady glow. Inside, the quiet took on a different shape, closer, more personal. The woman moved about the space without hurry, placing a cloth here, straightening a book there. Each movement seemed less like tidying and more like completing a thought. "You can stay as long as you need tonight," she said, not looking at you as she spoke. There was no emphasis on tonight, no suggestion of mourning, just the present, offered fully. You took a slow sip of the tea. The warmth settled easily, and somewhere between the door closing behind you and the cup resting in your hands, you realized something important had already happened. The town had not only let you arrive, it had given you a place to stop. Five, walking without a destination. When you stepped back outside, the night had settled more fully into itself. The door closed behind you with a soft final sound, and the warmth from inside lingered on your coat and hands. The street looked the same as before, yet felt different now, as if you were seeing it from a slightly closer distance. You didn't choose a direction. Your feet moved first, carrying you along a narrow street that curved gently away from the square. The stones beneath you were worn smooth, their surface uneven but familiar, like something that had been walked on thoughtfully for a long time. The lamps guided the way without instruction. Each one cast its circle of light just far enough to reach the next. There were no dark gaps, no sudden brightness. The rhythm of light felt deliberate, measured, as if someone had once taken care to place them so walking would always feel natural. A bakery window glowed softly to your right. Inside, shelves stood mostly empty, a few loaves resting beneath cloth. The air carried a faint trace of warm bread and flour, not fresh, but remembered. You did not feel hungry. The scent was comforting without asking for anything. Farther on, the street narrowed again. Here, the houses leaned slightly toward each other, their upper floors closer than their foundations. Window boxes lined the walls, some filled with late flowers, others with nothing but dark soil, resting for another season. You passed a small workshop with its door half open. A single light burned inside, illuminating a workbench scattered with simple tools. No one was there, yet the space felt active, as if work had paused rather than ended. The quiet did not suggest absence, it suggested continuation. The street opened into another small square. This one held a low fountain at its center. Water moved gently within it, not splashing, just circulating, catching the lamplight in slow, shifting patterns. A bench stood nearby, its surface darkened by moisture, inviting but not insistent. You paused there briefly, not to rest exactly, just to stand. Sounds drifted through the air in fragments, a murmur of conversation from an unseen window, the soft closing of a door, footsteps moving away rather than toward you. Each sound arrived, existed, and then left. making room for the next. You noticed how different each street felt. One smelled faintly of wood and oil. Another carried the coolness of stone and water. A third felt warmer, the lamps closer together, the windows brighter. None of it repeated itself. The town did not rely on a single mood. It offered variations without contrast, like different notes within the same calm tone. At some point, you realized you were smiling slightly, not because anything amusing had happened, but because there was nothing you needed to track, no route to remember, no destination waiting ahead. You could turn back at any moment. You could continue. Both options felt equally light. The lamps remained steady above you, their glow unchanged, as if assuring you that whichever way you chose, the pace would remain the same. And so you kept walking, not to arrive anywhere in particular, but because moving through the town felt like a conversation that did not require words. Six, the way people moved through the evening. You began to notice the people more clearly as you walked, not all at once, not as a group, individually. A man stood outside a small shop, adjusting the sign in the window even though it was already straight. He stepped back, looked at it for a moment, then nodded to himself, not with satisfaction but with ease. He went back inside and left the light on. Across the street, a woman watered a row of plants set beneath her window. She moved slowly, letting the water soak in fully before moving to the next pot. When she finished, she stayed there for a moment longer, watching the leaves settle, as if that part mattered too. No one seemed to be finishing up for the night, and yet no one seemed busy. A pair of older residents walked past you side by side, their conversation so quiet you couldn't make out the words. Their steps were even, matched to each other rather than to any destination. They did not move aside when they noticed you. They simply adjusted their path slightly, the way people do when they expect space to exist for everyone. You passed a cafe that remained open without urgency. Inside, only a few tables were occupied. One person read slowly, turning pages with deliberate care. Another sat with a cup that had gone untouched for some time, staring out the window without impatience. The person behind the counter wiped the surface once, not because it needed it, but because there was time to do so. What struck you most was the absence of signals. No glances at phones, no checking of watches, no sense of time pressing from behind. The lamps outside continued to glow steadily, as if the town had decided that darkness did not require dimming itself any further. You noticed how people ended their movements. A door closed, and the person who closed it did not rush away. They stood for a moment, feeling the handle settle back into place. A conversation ended, and neither person hurried to fill the silence. They simply nodded and continued on their separate ways. Even departures felt unforced. A shopkeeper stepped outside, locked the door carefully, and left the lamp inside burning. You wondered if it would stay on all night, and realized that the question did not feel important enough to answer. The town did not perform rest. It practiced it. As you walked, You felt your own movements begin to change in response. Your steps slowed slightly, not from fatigue, but from alignment. Your breathing deepened without effort. Your attention widened, taking in more without focusing hard on anything. No one here was trying to arrive somewhere else. They were already where they needed to be. And as you moved among them, unremarkable and unexamined, it became clear that you were not a visitor being observed. You were simply another person moving through the evening at its natural pace. Seven, a conversation that didn't need explaining. You stopped near a small stand set against the wall of a narrow building. It wasn't a shop in the usual sense. There was no sign, no open door, just a wooden counter built into the stone, lit by a single lamp overhead. A few items rested there: jars with handwritten labels, a basket of folded cloths, a stack of thin books bound in soft covers. A man stood behind the counter, arranging the jars without hurry. He looked up when he noticed you, not startled, not curious. His expression carried the calm recognition of someone who was used to people appearing exactly when they were meant to. "Evening," he said. His voice was quiet, even, without any particular inflection. "Evening," you replied. You both stood there for a moment, neither rushing to continue. The man set one of the jars down and rested his hands lightly on the counter. "You found your way in," he said, not as a question. "Yes," you answered. It felt like the right amount of explanation. He nodded once. "Most do," he said. "Eventually." You glanced at the jars. The labels were simple. No descriptions, just names that felt more like suggestions than instructions. "Are you open?" you asked. "I am," he said. "The counter is." You smiled faintly at that. You picked up one of the books. It was light, its pages worn smooth at the edges. The text inside was handwritten, careful but unpretentious. You didn't read long enough to understand what it was about, only long enough to notice that the words did not rush toward the margin. "People come through here often?" you asked. He considered this for a moment. "They come," he said, "often enough." There was no sales pitch, no invitation, no reason given to stay or leave. The quiet between you felt complete rather than empty. "You can walk as long as you like tonight," he added gently, as if offering information rather than advice. "The lamps won't change." You looked up at the nearest one, its light held steady, exactly as before. "That helps," you said. He nodded again, satisfied, and returned to arranging the counter, not dismissing you, not holding you there. You placed the book back where it had been. "Thank you," you said, though you weren't entirely sure what you were thanking him for. "You're welcome," he replied easily. "Enjoy the evening." You stepped away, continuing down the street. The conversation stayed with you, not because of what had been said, but because nothing had been demanded. No explanation, no conclusion, just a shared moment that fit neatly into the night. And as you walked on, it became clear that this was how the town spoke to people, briefly, simply. without asking them to understand more than they were ready to. Eight, walking beside someone who knew the pace. You didn't notice when he first fell into step beside you. There was no announcement, no greeting. One moment you were walking alone beneath the lamps, and the next there was another presence moving at the same unhurried rhythm. He was about your height, wearing a coat that looked used but well cared for. Nothing about him stood out, and that seemed intentional. His steps were quiet, matching yours without effort, as if he had been walking this way long before you arrived. After a few moments, he spoke. "It's a good evening for it," he said. "For what?" you asked. "For arriving," he replied. You continued walking together. The street widened slightly, opening into a stretch where the lamps were spaced farther apart. The light here felt deeper, pooling on the ground rather than floating above it. "You live here?" you asked. He shook his head. "Not exactly." That was all he offered. The way he walked suggested familiarity without ownership. He did not point things out. He did not guide you from place to place. He simply kept pace, turning when you turned, slowing when you slowed. At a corner where two streets met, you paused. One path led toward brighter windows and distant voices. The other curved gently downhill, quieter, the lamps fewer but just as steady. He waited without comment. You chose the quieter path. "Most people do," he said, not approving, just observing. As you walked, he spoke occasionally, but never for long, about how the town had learned where to place its lamps, about how people stopped measuring evenings once they stayed long enough, about how some places worked better when they weren't explained too carefully. None of it felt like instruction. It felt like noticing something together. You passed a low stone wall where moss had begun to grow in the seams. He rested his hand on it briefly, as if acknowledging it, then continued on. The gesture was small, but it carried a sense of continuity, like this walk had happened many times before with many different people. "Do you ever leave?" you asked. He considered this while they crossed a narrow bridge over a slow-moving stream. "Yes," he said, "and I always come back." The answer did not invite further questions. Ahead, the street opened into a quieter section of town. Fewer windows, more space between buildings. The lamps here seemed older, their glass slightly clouded, their glow softer but no less reliable. He slowed, and you slowed with him. "This is usually where I turn back," he said. "You stopped together." "For me," he added, "not for you." You nodded. He did not wish you luck. He did not offer advice. He simply gave a small nod, stepped aside, and began walking back the way you had come, his figure blending easily into the light. You stood there for a moment, alone again, but not in the way you had been before. The town felt closer now, less unfamiliar, and as you continued on, you carried the sense that someone had not shown you where to go, only how to move. Nine, the stories that were never collected. You began to notice how people spoke about themselves here. Not directly, not all at once. Their stories surfaced naturally, in pieces, the way warmth rises from stone long after the sun has gone. Near the edge of a small square, you met a woman standing beside a cart filled with folded blankets. She adjusted them carefully, even though no one was waiting. "I planned to stay one night," she said, when you asked how long she'd been there. Her voice held no regret. "That was 3 years ago," she added, smoothing a corner. "I kept meaning to leave in the morning. The mornings were always kind." She didn't explain further. She didn't need to. Farther along, a man leaned against a doorway, watching the light settle on the street. He spoke only after a long pause, as if making sure the moment had room for it. "I left once," he said. "I thought I should. You waited." "I didn't miss the town," he continued. "I missed how I felt walking through it. That was all." He nodded to himself and stepped back inside, leaving the lamp burning behind him. Later, near the stream, you passed an older couple sitting quietly on a bench. They weren't talking. Their hands rested close together, not touching, but aware of the space between them. "We came here by accident," the woman said softly, as if responding to a question you hadn't asked. "Our car broke down." The man smiled at that. "It was the longest repair of our lives." They stayed seated as you moved on, their presence complete without explanation. Each story felt different, different reasons, different outcomes, different lengths of time, but none of them carried urgency. No one spoke about what they had escaped. No one spoke about what they had lost. They spoke only about arriving, staying, or remembering how it felt to be here. You realized something then. This town did not collect people. It received them, and when they were ready, it let them move on without resistance. The lamps continued to glow above it all, unchanged by who stayed or who left. As you walked, the weight of other people's expectations, even the ones you hadn't noticed carrying, began to thin. You did not feel smaller, you felt lighter. 10. The place the town did not advertise. You found it without looking for it. The street narrowed gradually, then ended without ceremony at a low stone building set slightly apart from the others. It had no sign, no lit window facing the road, only a lamp mounted high above the door, its glow falling downward in a calm, deliberate way. The door was already open. Inside, the air felt different, cooler, steadier, as if the room had learned how to hold quiet without effort. The walls were lined with shelves, but they did not carry books or objects meant to be studied. Instead, they held ordinary things: folded maps, small notebooks, bundles of paper tied with string, a few framed sketches whose subjects were places rather than people. A long table occupied the center of the room. Its surface showed marks from years of use, shallow scratches, softened edges, places where hands had rested often enough to leave a trace. Lamps hung above it, spaced widely, their light even and restrained. No one spoke when you entered. A few people were already there, seated at different points along the table. Each was engaged in something quiet and personal. One person traced a route on a map without urgency. Another wrote a single line in a notebook, paused, then closed it. Someone else simply sat, hands folded, looking toward the far wall. You took an empty chair. It welcomed your weight without adjustment. What struck you was not what people were doing, but how they were doing it. No one rushed to finish. No one seemed concerned with starting. The room existed between those two ideas, comfortable in the space where nothing needed to be completed. A woman at the far end of the table looked up briefly and met your gaze. "This is where people come when they don't want advice," she said quietly. You nodded, understanding immediately. She returned to her papers without waiting for a response. You rested your hands on the table. The wood was cool, grounding. The lamps above cast light downward only, leaving the upper corners of the room in shadow, as if to make space for thought without pulling it outward. Time behaved differently here, not slower, just less demanding. You were not asked to remember anything. You were not asked to plan. The room held what people brought into it, then let it go. When you finally stood to leave, no one marked the moment. No one looked up. The door remained open, the lamp steady, the table unchanged. As you stepped back into the street, you realized the town had offered you something rare. A place that existed not to be visited, but to be used, quietly, briefly, exactly as needed. When something shifted without needing a name. You noticed it as you walked away. Not immediately, but gradually. The street felt the same beneath your feet. The lamps glowed as they had before. The air carried the same quiet weight of evening. Nothing around you had changed in any obvious way. And yet, something had. Your steps had become lighter, though you hadn't decided to walk differently. Your breathing felt deeper, but you hadn't taken a deliberate breath. It was as if your body had adjusted itself while your attention was elsewhere. You realized you were no longer scanning the street. Earlier, your eyes had moved constantly, noting corners, doors, people, light. Now they rested more easily, taking in what was there without measuring it. You weren't looking for anything to guide you. You were already moving at the right pace. A memory surfaced, quiet and uninvited. Not a specific moment, but a familiar feeling. The sense of always being slightly ahead of yourself, of carrying the next thought before finishing the current one. That feeling wasn't gone. It was simply quieter. You passed the square again, the one where you had first stopped the car. The benches were still empty. The tree still stood with its leaves barely stirring. The stone still held the day's warmth in a way you could feel through the soles of your shoes. You stood there for a moment, not to think, not to decide, just to stand. You noticed how your shoulders now rested naturally, no longer lifted in anticipation. Your jaw no longer held tension by default. Even your hands hanging at your sides felt less prepared for something that hadn't yet happened. Nothing had been resolved. No answers had appeared. But the space those questions had occupied felt wider, less crowded. You understood then that the town had not given you anything new. It had simply taken nothing from you, and in that absence of pressure, of expectation, of urgency, something inside had reorganized itself quietly and efficiently, without needing your permission. You began walking again, this time toward the place where you were staying, not because the evening was over, but because it was complete enough. Choosing to stay until morning. The door to the house was still warm when you reached it, not from heat, exactly, from use, from being opened and closed often enough to feel familiar. The lamp beside it glowed steadily, unchanged since you had last stepped outside, as if the evening had simply been holding its place. Inside, the quiet met you again, shaped now by recognition. The woman was seated at the table writing a short note in a narrow book. She looked up as you entered, then closed it without hurry. "You're back," she said. "Yes," you replied. There was no need to explain where you had gone. She stood and poured water into the kettle, setting it on the stove with the same unhurried care as before. You noticed that nothing had been moved while you were gone. The chair stood where you had left it. The cup rested exactly where you had set it down. "You don't need to decide anything tonight," she said, almost casually. "People sometimes think they do." The kettle began its quiet warming, a low sound that blended into the room rather than rising above it. "I wasn't planning to," you said. She smiled faintly, as if that were the expected answer. "There's a room upstairs," she continued. "It's ready whenever you are. The lamps outside won't change before morning." You nodded. The idea of morning did not feel urgent. It did not feel distant either. It existed simply as the next thing, waiting without pressure. You climbed the stairs slowly. Each step responded with a soft sound, not creaking, just acknowledging movement. At the top, the room opened into a space that felt prepared rather than staged. A bed beneath a low window, a lamp turned low, a chair placed near the wall, nothing extra. You set your bag down and sat for a moment on the edge of the bed. The mattress supported you immediately, without needing adjustment. Outside, the lamps continued their steady glow, visible through the glass in quiet intervals as you shifted your view. You did not check the time. You did not feel the need to. Downstairs, the kettle clicked softly, finished with its task. Footsteps moved once, then settled. The house returned to its resting state, complete and untroubled. You lay back and let the room hold you. Staying until morning did not feel like a decision. It felt like alignment. And with that, the night began to gather itself around you, not as something that needed to be watched, but as something that knew exactly how to continue on its own. Destino Team 13, the night settling into its own shape. The room grew quieter in a way that felt intentional, not emptier, just more settled. The lamp beside the bed cast a low, even glow, softened by its shade so the light rested rather than spread. It did not reach into corners aggressively. It allowed shadow to exist where it naturally formed, calm and unremarkable. You adjusted the blanket once, only once. After that, your body seemed to recognize the position as sufficient. Your shoulders rested fully against the mattress. Your legs felt supported along their entire length. Nothing needed correction. Outside the window, the town continued without effort. A lamp across the street brightened the stone beneath it. Another farther away marked the curve of a narrow road. Their light did not pulse or fade. It simply remained, steady enough that you stopped checking whether it would change. The air inside the room held a faint scent of clean wood and something warm, perhaps from the kettle downstairs. It was not strong enough to name, only strong enough to notice, then forget. You became aware of smaller sounds, the soft settling of the house as it cooled, a distant footstep, unhurried, then gone. Water moving somewhere beyond the buildings, its rhythm slow and consistent. Each sound arrived gently and left just as gently, never overlapping in a way that demanded attention. Your breathing began to slow, not because you tried to control it, because nothing around you required speed. Inhaling felt quieter than earlier. Exhaling felt longer, more complete. The space between breaths widened naturally, like a pause that had always been waiting to be noticed. The lamp remained on. No one suggested turning it off. The town outside did not darken further. It did not deepen into night dramatically. It simply continued being evening, held in place by the lamps that had no interest in marking hours. You noticed that your thoughts had changed texture. They no longer arrived in full sentences. They came as brief impressions, warmth, weight, stillness, then drifted away before forming into anything more. The room did not ask you to sleep. It allowed it. You felt the bed support you without effort, the blanket resting exactly where it belonged. Your hands lay open, no longer prepared to hold anything. Outside, the lamp stayed on. Inside, the night found its rhythm. And somewhere between one breath and the next, the need to remain alert faded, replaced by the quiet certainty that nothing would be missed if you let go for a while. "14. When the night slowed, everything gently." The pace of the night eased further without signaling that it was doing so. Nothing stopped. Nothing shifted suddenly. It was simply easier to remain still. Your breathing continued its quiet pattern, deeper now, more even. Each inhale felt complete on its own. Each exhale took its time, unhurried, as if there were no reason to reach the end of it quickly. Your body grew heavier in a comfortable way, not weighed down, settled. The mattress supported you evenly, no single point asking for attention. The blanket kept its warmth without pressing. Your arms rested where they had fallen, your hands relaxed, fingers loose. Outside, the town offered fewer sounds now. A door closed somewhere in the distance. A step crossed stone and did not return. The water beyond the buildings continued its slow movement, steady and reassuring. These sounds did not interrupt one another. They appeared separately, each with enough space around it to exist fully before fading away. The lamp beside the bed remained unchanged. Its light did not dim further. It did not flicker. It simply stayed. Your thoughts, what remained of them, felt farther apart now. When one appeared, it carried no urgency and no direction. It passed through awareness like a cloud crossing a wide sky, leaving nothing behind that needed following. Warmth gathered along your back and shoulders. Your jaw softened further. Your tongue rested easily. Even your eyes, closed and still, felt less engaged, as if they were no longer responsible for watching anything. Time no longer moved forward in a noticeable way. It spread out instead, wide and unstructured, allowing moments to exist without being counted. Minutes may have passed. More may have followed. There was no difference between them. The town continued exactly as it had before, held in place by its steady lamps, comfortable with the idea that most of it was now unseen. And in that steadiness, your awareness drifted lower, closer to the body, closer to rest. Nothing new entered, nothing needed to. The night had slowed enough to hold you without effort, carrying you gently toward deeper rest, one calm breath at a time. "15. The night holding its steady rhythm." The night no longer unfolds, it remains. Your body rests fully now, supported in every place it meets the bed. There is no sense of alignment to check, no need to adjust. The position you are in feels complete, as if it arrived on its own and intends to stay. Breathing moves quietly and evenly, in and out. Each breath fills the space it needs and then releases it without hurry. The pause that follows feels natural, unforced, wide enough to be comfortable. The room remains unchanged. The lamp continues to glow softly. The window holds its dark reflection. The walls stand still and quiet around you. Nothing enters, nothing leaves. Outside, the town continues its gentle pattern without variation. Lamps remain lit. Streets remain calm. The water beyond the buildings keeps its slow, steady movement, too distant to define, too consistent to distract. Your awareness drifts lower, settling closer to physical sensation. The weight of the blanket, the warmth along your legs, the steady contact of your back against the mattress. These sensations do not ask to be noticed. They simply exist, reliable and constant. Thought no longer forms into language. If anything appears at all, it dissolves before it can take shape. There is no direction to follow, no image to hold. The mind rests because there is nothing it needs to do. Time passes without structure, not measured, not marked. Moments stretch and soften, blending into one another without edges. The night holds this sameness carefully, knowing it is what allows sleep to deepen. Your body responds naturally. Muscles remain loose. Your face stays relaxed. Your hands rest open and still. The quiet does not feel empty. It feels complete. The town remains awake enough to keep the lamps on, yet quiet enough to let everything else rest. That balance holds steady, unchanged, predictable. And within that balance, sleep settles fully, smooth and uninterrupted, supported by the night exactly as it is. 16. where the night continues without an edge. Nothing begins here, nothing ends. The night simply remains in place, holding its shape gently and without effort. Breath continues to move in its quiet rhythm, slow and even, each inhale arriving exactly when it needs to, each exhale leaving without urgency. The space between breaths feels wide and calm, like still water resting between soft waves. Your body stays supported, unchanged. The bed holds steady. The blanket keeps its warmth. There is no shift in position, no signal to adjust. Everything rests where it belongs. The room remains quiet and familiar. The lamp stays on. The walls do not move. The window holds the same soft darkness. Nothing new enters the space. Nothing needs to. Outside, the town continues exactly as it has all night. The lamps remain lit, steady and patient. Streets stay calm. The distant water keeps its slow, predictable movement, neither closer nor farther than before. Time no longer passes in a way that can be followed. It spreads evenly, without markers, without divisions. One moment blends into the next so smoothly that there is no point where one could say something changed. Awareness rests low now, close to the body, close to sensation, close to stillness. Warmth remains constant. Weight remains comfortable. Quiet remains complete. If a thought appears, it dissolves before forming, leaving no trace behind. The mind rests because it has been given nothing to hold. The night does not deepen further. It does not lighten. It stays exactly where it is, balanced and calm, repeating itself gently without repetition, steady enough to trust. The town holds its lamps on through the dark hours. The room holds you without effort. Breath continues. Rest continues. And the night goes on like this, smoothly and endlessly, with no need for awareness, no need for attention, no need for waking. Just the same calm rhythm, again and again, as long as it is needed.